Let me be clear about what this is and what it isn't. This isn't about being soft. It's not about suppressing emotions or pretending everything is fine. This is about power, real power. The kind that lets you think clearly under pressure, make long-term decisions when others panic, and move forward while chaos tries to pull you backward. The calmest person in the room usually isn't the weakest. They're the most prepared. They've done the mental work. They understand cause and effect. And they know that losing control for 10 seconds can cost 10 years. Today, I'm giving you 5 principles to train your mind to stay calm in any situation. Principles built on discipline, sacrifice, focus, and long-term vision. No fluff, just truth. Most people misunderstand calm because they confuse it with comfort. They think calm shows up when life gets easier, when people cooperate, when money is steady, when nothing unexpected happens. That belief quietly puts their emotional state at the mercy of circumstances they don't control. The truth is less flattering and more useful. Calm is not something you feel first. It's something you decide to practice before you ever feel it. And that decision often comes at the exact moment when every instinct in you is screaming to do the opposite. When pressure hits, your body reacts faster than your thinking mind. Heart rate rises, muscles tighten, your brain shifts into a defensive mode that was designed for survival, not strategy. In modern life, that system gets triggered by emails, tone of voice, traffic, social media comments, financial stress, and personal conflict. None of these situations threaten your life, but your nervous system doesn't know that. It reacts as if every challenge is an emergency. Calm, in that moment, is not a mood you wait for. It is an interruption of that automatic process. It is the decision to pause even briefly before acting. That pause is uncomfortable. It feels unnatural because reaction feels justified. Reaction feels honest. Reaction gives you the illusion of control. But reaction is expensive. It trades long-term outcomes for short-term emotional relief. You say what you want to say. You send the message you shouldn't send. You make the decision that feels good for 10 seconds and costs you 10 months. Calm, on the other hand, feels like restraint. It feels like swallowing words. It feels like delaying gratification, which is exactly why it works. Think about how many conflicts in everyday life are not about the issue itself, but about timing and tone. A disagreement at work turns into a reputation problem because someone couldn't wait to cool down. A relationship fracture begins not because of a major betrayal, but because of a reactive comment made during stress. A financial mistake happens not because of lack of intelligence, but because anxiety demanded immediate action. In each case, the outcome wasn't determined by intelligence or intention, but by emotional control in a small window of time. Calm is choosing to widen that window. It's choosing to create space between stimulus and response. That space is where judgment lives. Without it, even smart people make predictable mistakes. With it, average people make surprisingly strong decisions. This is why calm is not about personality. Loud people can be calm. Quiet people can be reactive. Calm is a trained behavior, not a character trait. There is a hidden trade-off here that most people don't want to acknowledge. Choosing calm often means choosing to look weak in the moment. It means not correcting someone immediately. It means letting an insult pass. It means walking away from an argument you could win. The ego hates this because it feels like loss. But ego measures the wrong scoreboard. Calm measures outcomes over time. It understands opportunity cost. It understands that every emotional reaction steals focus from something more important. Focus is a limited resource. When you waste it on emotional noise, you don't have it for building skills, improving systems, or thinking long-term. People who are constantly reactive are constantly distracted. They mistake busyness for progress and emotional intensity for passion. Meanwhile, the calm individual keeps showing up, keeps thinking clearly, and keeps making small, disciplined decisions that compound quietly. This is visible everywhere once you start paying attention. The person who stays calm in meetings tends to be trusted with more responsibility. Not because they talk more, but because they don't escalate tension unnecessarily. The person who stays calm during financial stress tends to recover faster because they don't lock themselves into bad decisions driven by fear. The person who stays calm in relationships tends to build deeper trust because their presence feels stable rather than volatile. Stability is underrated. People talk about ambition, but ambition without emotional control turns into chaos. Calm allows ambition to be directed instead of scattered. It keeps you from chasing every impulse and reacting to every distraction. It helps you say no without drama and yes with intention. There is also a moral element to calm that rarely gets discussed. Losing control doesn't just hurt you, it spills onto other people. Families absorb it, teams absorb it, children learn from it. When you choose calm, you are choosing not to pass your unmanaged stress onto others. That choice has ripple effects that extend far beyond the moment. It teaches people around you that problems can be addressed without emotional damage. This doesn't mean suppressing emotions or pretending you don't feel anger, frustration, or disappointment. It means acknowledging those emotions without letting them dictate your actions. Feeling is automatic. Acting is optional. Calm lives in that distinction. You can be upset and still disciplined. You can be disappointed and still patient. You can be angry and still silent. Over time, this practice reshapes your identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who gets triggered easily. You start seeing yourself as someone who can handle pressure. That shift builds confidence, not the loud kind, but the quiet kind that comes from knowing you won't sabotage yourself when things get hard. Confidence rooted in self-trust lasts longer than confidence rooted in external validation. The uncomfortable truth is that many people don't actually want calm. They want justification. They want permission to react because reaction feels alive. Calm feels boring. It doesn't give you a rush. It gives you results. And results take time. They require patience, sacrifice, and the willingness to delay emotional payoff in exchange for long-term stability. Choosing calm is choosing to invest in your future self. It's accepting that not every thought deserves a voice, and not every emotion deserves action. It's understanding that discipline is not about restriction, but about direction. Where you place your emotional energy determines what grows and what decays in your life. When you look back years from now, you won't remember most of the moments you stayed calm. They won't feel dramatic or heroic, but you will live inside the outcomes they produced. Better relationships, stronger credibility, clearer thinking, and fewer self-inflicted wounds. Calm doesn't announce itself. It works quietly, consistently, and relentlessly, rewarding those who choose it again and again, especially when it feels hardest to do so. Most people talk about calm as if it's something that should come from inside alone, as if sheer willpower is enough to override daily chaos. That idea sounds empowering, but it quietly sets people up to fail. Human beings are not isolated systems. We are constantly being shaped by what we see, hear, consume, and tolerate. Your environment is not neutral. It is training you every day, whether you pay attention to it or not. And if your surroundings are disorganized, emotionally loud, and unstable, your mind will reflect that instability no matter how strong you believe you are. Your nervous system learns to repetition. It adapts to patterns. If your days are filled with urgency, noise, unpredictable schedules, constant notifications, unresolved conflict, and people who live in reaction mode, your body learns to stay alert even when there is no real danger. This is not a personal flaw. It is biology doing its job. The problem is that a nervous system stuck in constant alert cannot produce sustained focus, patience, or long-term thinking. It produces short-term decisions designed to escape discomfort, not build a future. Look closely at how many people say they want peace, but structure their lives to guarantee stress. They wake up late, rush through the morning, consume random information immediately, and begin their day already behind. They move from one obligation to another without transition, carrying emotional residue from every interaction. By the time something genuinely important requires calm thought, their mental reserves are already depleted. They then blame themselves for lacking discipline, when the real issue is that they never created conditions where discipline could survive. This is where uncomfortable honesty matters. You cannot expect a calm mind while living in constant disorder. You cannot expect emotional stability while feeding on endless stimulation. You cannot expect clarity while surrounding yourself with people who thrive on drama and distraction. Every choice you make about your environment is a vote for the kind of mental state you will live in. Those votes compound. Consider something as basic as sleep. People underestimate how much poor sleep destabilizes emotional regulation. When sleep is inconsistent, your tolerance for stress drops sharply. Small inconveniences feel personal. Delays feel insulting. Minor problems feel overwhelming. The person you become on poor sleep is not your true self. It is a compromised version of you. Yet many people sacrifice sleep casually, as if it were optional, and then wonder why calm feels unreachable. The trade-off is clear: late night scrolling or chaotic schedules in exchange for emotional volatility the next day. The same pattern shows up in digital environments. Constant exposure to alerts, opinions, conflict, and comparison trains your brain to expect interruption. Focus becomes fragmented. Silence starts to feel uncomfortable. Calm begins to feel like boredom rather than clarity. Over time, you lose the ability to sit with a thought long enough to develop depth. You react to information instead of processing it. That isn't a motivation problem. It's an environment problem. Pay attention to the people around you as well. Emotional states are contagious. Spend enough time around anxious, reactive, or pessimistic individuals, and your baseline shifts without you noticing. Conversations that revolve around complaints, gossip, and outrage may feel normal, but they keep your nervous system activated. You leave those interactions slightly more tense than you arrived. Do that daily, and tension becomes your default. Calm then feels foreign, almost suspicious, as if something must be wrong. This is why disciplined people are selective, not arrogant. They protect their environment because they understand opportunity cost. Every hour spent in unnecessary noise is an hour not spent thinking, building, or resting. Every relationship that drains more than it gives takes energy away from something else that matters. These costs are rarely obvious in the moment, but they show up years later in stalled progress and chronic dissatisfaction. Structure is not restrictive, it is protective. When you design predictable routines, you reduce the number of decisions your nervous system has to make. Less decision fatigue means more emotional bandwidth. That bandwidth can then be used for meaningful work, thoughtful conversations, and deliberate planning. This is why people who appear calm often live simple, repetitive lives by choice. Their simplicity is strategic. It keeps their internal state stable so they can handle complexity when it truly matters. Think about how different your reactions are when your day starts well versus when it starts in chaos. On a calm morning, a problem feels solvable. On a rush morning, the same problem feels threatening. The external situation hasn't changed. Your internal state has, and that state was shaped hours earlier by choices that felt small at the time. Discipline shows up here not as intensity, but as consistency. Going to bed at the same time. Eating in a way that doesn't spike and crash your energy. Limiting exposure to things that agitate you unnecessarily. Choosing environments that support who you are trying to become, not who you are trying to escape. None of these choices are dramatic. They are quiet. That is why many people ignore them. But quiet choices create loud outcomes over time. There's also an identity cost to chaotic environments. When your surroundings are unstable, you begin to see yourself as someone who is always reacting, always behind, always managing damage. That identity erodes confidence. You stop trusting yourself with bigger responsibilities because you are already overwhelmed by small ones. Calm environments reverse that process. They allow you to experience yourself as capable, measured, and reliable. That self-perception matters more than most people admit. Sacrifice is unavoidable here. You may have to reduce social exposure. You may have to step back from constant entertainment. You may have to disappoint people who benefit from your emotional availability, but don't contribute to your growth. These sacrifices can feel lonely at first, but loneliness is often temporary. Instability is not. Choosing your environment carefully is choosing long-term mental health over short-term comfort. The hardest part is that no one will applaud you for this work. No one sees the notifications you turned off, the conversations you declined, the routines you protected. From the outside, it looks like nothing is happening. Internally, everything is changing. Your nervous system begins to settle. Your reactions slow down. Your thoughts gain depth. Problems stop feeling like emergencies and start looking like puzzles. Misplaced focus doesn't usually destroy outcomes in obvious ways. It does it quietly. Through constant low-level stress, through divided attention, through emotional exhaustion that never quite reaches a breaking point but never allows real progress either. By the time people notice the damage, they call it burnout or bad luck, without tracing it back to the environments they tolerated for years. Calm is not something you demand from yourself in the middle of chaos. It is something you build by reducing chaos before it arrives. Your environment is either supporting your discipline or sabotaging it. There is no middle ground. Once you see that clearly, you stop asking why calm feels so hard and start asking a better question. What in my life is training me to stay unsettled? And what would happen if I removed it? Emotional control is often framed as a personal benefit, a way to feel better or reduce stress. But that framing misses a deeper truth. Emotional control is a form of respect for your future, and disrespecting your future has consequences whether you acknowledge them or not. Every emotional reaction is not just an expression of how you feel in the moment. It is a decision that either protects or damages what you are trying to build. Most people don't see that connection clearly because the cost of emotional reactions is usually delayed, and delayed costs are easy to ignore. When you lose control emotionally, it feels justified. You tell yourself the situation demanded it, the person deserved it, or the pressure made it unavoidable. That story protects your ego, but it doesn't protect your future. Your future only responds to patterns. It doesn't care about explanations. It reflects back the accumulated results of your behavior over time. One outburst might not ruin anything. 10 outbursts form a reputation. 50 form an identity. That identity eventually determines what opportunities come your way and which ones quietly disappear. Think about how trust actually works in real life. People trust those who are predictable under stress. They may admire passion, but they rely on stability. When someone is emotionally volatile, others instinctively limit their exposure. They share less information. They assign less responsibility. They lower expectations. None of this is announced. It happens silently, and by the time the emotionally reactive person notices, the gap between their ambition and their reality feels unfair. But it isn't unfair. It is the result of choices compounding. This pattern plays out in workplaces, families, and friendships. A person who consistently reacts with anger or defensiveness may believe they are being honest or assertive, but over time they become someone others work around rather than with. Meetings become cautious, conversations become shallow, opportunities for collaboration dry up. The person senses distance but often misattributes it to politics or disloyalty. The uncomfortable truth is that emotional unpredictability is expensive for everyone involved, so people protect themselves by limiting contact. Respecting your future means understanding that not every emotional impulse deserves action. Emotions are information, not instructions. They signal that something matters, but they do not tell you how to respond wisely. Acting on emotion without filtering it through long-term thinking is like spending money without checking your balance. It feels free in the moment, but the bill always arrives later. Consider a simple example. Responding to criticism. When someone criticizes you unfairly, the emotional impulse is to defend yourself immediately. The short-term payoff is relief. You feel heard. You feel strong. The long-term trade-off, however, may be that you are now seen as defensive, difficult, or emotionally unsafe to give feedback to. That perception lingers long after the argument ends. Alternatively, choosing to pause, assess whether the criticism has any value, and respond later with clarity may feel unsatisfying in the moment, but it preserves credibility and influence. The difference between these two paths is not courage or intelligence. It is emotional discipline. This discipline requires sacrifice. You sacrifice the pleasure of being right now in exchange for the advantage of being effective later. Most people struggle with this because later feels abstract, while now feels urgent. But your future self is built entirely out of those later moments. Ignoring them is a quiet form of self-betrayal. Relationships expose this dynamic clearly. Emotional reactions during conflict often aim to relieve internal tension rather than solve the problem. Raised voices, harsh words, and impulsive ultimatums discharge emotion, but they also create emotional debt. Trust erodes, safety decreases. The original issue becomes harder to address because it is now layered with hurt and defensiveness. Over time, the relationship becomes fragile, not because of one major failure, but because of many small moments where emotional control was sacrificed for temporary relief. Respecting your future in relationships means choosing responses that preserve the relationship's long-term health, even when your emotions argue otherwise. It means understanding that winning an argument is often the fastest way to lose trust. It means recognizing that how you handle conflict teaches others what to expect from you, and people adjust their behavior accordingly. The same principle applies to financial decisions. Emotional spending is rarely about the purchase itself. It is about escaping discomfort, stress, or comparison. The short-term benefit is a brief sense of relief or excitement. The long-term cost is financial instability, reduced options, and ongoing stress. People often frame these decisions as harmless indulgences, but repeated emotional spending quietly narrows the range of future choices. Opportunity cost shows up here clearly. Money spent impulsively is money that cannot be invested, saved, or used strategically later. Long-term thinkers treat emotional control as an asset. They understand that the ability to delay reaction creates leverage. When you don't react immediately, you gather information, you observe patterns, you choose timing. This makes your eventual response more effective and less costly. Over time, this habit builds a reputation for maturity and reliability, which attracts opportunities that are never offered to emotionally reactive individuals. There is also a private benefit that rarely gets discussed. Emotional control reduces regret. Regret is not caused by failure alone. It is caused by knowing you acted below your own standards. Many people live with low-level regret because they remember moments when they knew better but reacted anyway. That memory erodes self-respect. Discipline restores it. When you consistently act in alignment with your long-term values, even under pressure, you build internal trust. That trust is stabilizing. It makes future discipline easier because you believe in your own judgment. The uncomfortable part is accepting responsibility. It is easier to blame stress, other people, or circumstances for emotional reactions than to admit you chose relief over respect for your future. But responsibility is not about self-criticism. It is about control. If your emotions control you, your future is reactive by default. If you control your responses, your future becomes intentional. Misplaced focus shows up when people invest excessive energy in defending their ego instead of building their future. They prioritize being understood over being effective. They prioritize expressing feelings over managing consequences. Over time, this divided priority weakens outcomes. Progress slows. Relationships strain. Opportunities fade. None of this happens dramatically. It happens quietly, one reaction at a time. Emotional control is not about becoming detached or indifferent. It is about becoming selective. Selective with your words, your timing, and your energy. It is about understanding that your future self is always in the room, listening to how you handle pressure, watching whether you protect or sabotage what you are trying to build. When you choose restraint, you are not denying your emotions. You are placing them in service of something larger. Pressure has a way of revealing things we would rather not see. It exposes habits, not intentions. In moments of stress, people like to believe they will rise to the occasion, act wisely, and become the best version of themselves. In reality, pressure strips away performance and leaves only what has been practiced. What shows up under stress is not character in theory, but conditioning in action. This is why preparation matters more than motivation, and why calm in critical moments is rarely accidental. The mind does not improvise well under pressure. When time feels scarce and stakes feel high, the brain searches for the fastest available pattern, not the smartest one. It reaches for familiar responses because familiarity feels safe. If those responses were built through discipline, the outcome appears controlled and competent. If they were built through avoidance, distraction, or emotional reaction, the outcome appears chaotic. The pressure itself does not cause the behavior, it simply reveals it. Look at how people respond to sudden setbacks, a missed opportunity, a financial surprise, a public mistake. Some individuals immediately spiral into blame, panic, or self-criticism. Others slow down, assess what changed, and adjust their next step. The difference is not intelligence, it is rehearsal. One group has practiced reacting emotionally. The other has practiced thinking through discomfort. Practice does not always look like deliberate training. Often, it looks like what you tolerate daily. Daily habits are quiet rehearsals for future stress. How you handle small frustrations teaches your nervous system how to handle large ones. If every inconvenience leads to irritation, if every delay triggers anxiety, if every criticism feels like an attack, those responses become default settings. When something serious happens, the response scales up automatically. People are often surprised by how poorly they handle big moments, not realizing they trained for those moments through years of small, unmanaged reactions. This is where discipline becomes misunderstood. Discipline is often framed as intensity or self-control in dramatic moments, but its real function is consistency in ordinary ones. Showing up on time, finishing what you start, thinking through problems instead of venting about them. These behaviors don't feel heroic, but they build a mental framework that holds under pressure. Without that framework, motivation collapses as soon as conditions become uncomfortable. Consider someone who avoids planning because it feels restrictive. They prefer to improvise, believing flexibility is strength. Over time, they develop a habit of reacting instead of anticipating. When pressure hits, they feel overwhelmed because there is no structure to lean on. Contrast that with someone who plans modestly, reviews scenarios, and accepts that some outcomes are out of their control. Under pressure, they are not calm because they are fearless, but because they have already considered the possibilities. Preparation reduces surprise, and surprise is what triggers panic. The same principle applies emotionally. People who regularly reflect on their reactions, who notice patterns in their behavior, and who practice restraint in low-stakes situations build emotional muscle. That muscle is what carries them through high-stakes moments. Without it, even minor stress feels unbearable. Emotional endurance is not built during crises. It is built during quiet moments when no one is watching. There is an opportunity cost to neglecting this training. When pressure exposes unprepared habits, damage often spreads beyond the moment. A poorly handled conversation can permanently alter a relationship. A rash decision made under stress can close doors that never reopen. These outcomes are rarely catastrophic on their own, but they accumulate. Over time, the gap between where someone could have been and where they are becomes noticeable. That gap is filled with untrained moments. Misplaced focus plays a role here. Many people invest energy into looking confident rather than becoming capable. They rehearse image instead of process. Under calm conditions, this can work temporarily. Under pressure, the lack of substance shows. Confidence without preparation turns into defensiveness. Optimism without systems turns into denial. Pressure doesn't create these flaws. It simply removes the mask. Training your mind for pressure requires accepting discomfort by choice rather than waiting for it to be forced on you. This might mean practicing difficult conversations instead of avoiding them. It might mean working through problems methodically rather than escaping into distraction. It might mean exposing yourself to controlled stress, such as physical training or demanding projects, so your nervous system learns that discomfort does not equal danger. Each exposure teaches the mind that it can remain steady without needing to react impulsively. This is why people who have endured structured challenges often appear calm in situations others find overwhelming. They are not immune to stress, they are familiar with it. Familiar with it reduces fear. Fear is what narrows thinking. When fear is reduced, clarity increases. Clarity allows choice. Choice is where control lives. There is also a humility required in this process. Training assumes you are not as prepared as you think you are. It requires acknowledging gaps in your responses without excusing them. Many people resist this because it threatens their self-image. But self-image that cannot tolerate honest assessment collapses under pressure anyway. True confidence comes from knowing your weaknesses and working on them deliberately, not pretending they don't exist. Focus matters here because divided attention weakens training. If your mind is constantly jumping between tasks, inputs, and concerns, it never settles long enough to build depth. Shallow focus produces shallow habits. Under pressure, shallow habits fail quickly. Depth, on the other hand, creates stability. Doing fewer things with more attention trains patience and persistence. Those qualities become invaluable when time is limited and stakes are high. Sacrifice is unavoidable. Training takes time, energy, and consistency. It means saying no to some comforts in exchange for future resilience. The sacrifice is subtle but real. You give up immediate relief for long-term strength. Many people avoid this because the reward is not immediate and the work is not visible. But pressure does not care about visibility. It only responds to what has been built. The quiet observation is this: people who seem composed in crisis usually lived composed lives long before the crisis arrived. Their calm is not a performance. It is a reflection of habits aligned over time. Pressure simply turns up the volume on those habits. When you understand this, you stop asking how to stay calm when everything goes wrong and start asking a more useful question. What am I practicing when nothing is wrong? Most people underestimate how long the road really is. They make plans as if progress will be smooth, linear, and emotionally rewarding. When reality fails to cooperate, frustration shows up, and with it, the temptation to abandon discipline. Calm is what keeps you moving when the road stretches longer than expected. It is not a personality trait or a luxury. It is the stabilizing force that allows long-term vision to survive repeated delays, misunderstandings, and setbacks without turning into bitterness or apathy. Long-term goals demand emotional endurance. You can have clarity about what you want and still struggle to stay consistent when results arrive slowly. The human brain is wired to respond to immediate feedback. When effort does not produce visible rewards, motivation weakens. Calm steps in where motivation fades. It prevents emotional swings from dictating behavior. Without calm, people mistake temporary discomfort for permanent failure and make decisions that feel relieving in the moment but destructive over time. Think about how often people quit not because something is impossible, but because it takes longer than they expected. A skill that takes years to master becomes not worth it after months of slow progress. A business that grows steadily but quietly is abandoned because it lacks excitement. A relationship that requires patience is discarded in search of novelty. In each case, the trade-off is the same. Long-term value is exchanged for short-term emotional relief. Calm allows you to tolerate the gap between effort and reward long enough for value to accumulate. This gap is where discipline either strengthens or collapses. Discipline is often misunderstood as forceful control, but its real function is consistency in the absence of excitement. Calm keeps discipline from turning into resentment. When people force themselves forward without emotional regulation, they eventually burn out. They begin to associate their goal with stress and sacrifice rather than meaning. Calm reframes the process. It allows you to accept the cost without dramatizing it. There is a difference between patience and passivity. Patience is active. It involves continued effort guided by a long-term framework. Passivity is disengagement disguised as acceptance. Calm supports patience by helping you distinguish between what requires action now and what requires time. Without calm, people either rush unnecessarily or freeze entirely. Both responses derail progress. Consider how calm affects decision-making over years. A calm individual reviews outcomes objectively. They adjust strategies without emotional attachment. They are less likely to overcorrect after a setback or double down on a failing approach out of pride. Emotional volatility, by contrast, creates erratic behavior. One good result leads to overconfidence. One bad result leads to doubt. The path becomes inconsistent, not because the goal changed, but because emotional states kept interfering. Opportunity cost becomes visible here. Every emotional reaction that pulls you off course costs time. Time is the one resource that cannot be recovered. When calm is absent, time is wasted on regret, second-guessing, and recovery from self-inflicted damage. When calm is present, time is invested steadily, even if progress is slow. Over years, this difference compounds dramatically. Focus is protected by calm. Long-term projects require deep focus, but deep focus is fragile. It is easily disrupted by frustration, comparison, and impatience. Calm acts as a buffer. It allows you to notice distractions without chasing them. It helps you return to your priorities after interruptions. Without calm, focus fragments, and fragmenting focus produces fragmented results. Misplaced focus often looks like urgency. People feel busy, pressured, and overwhelmed, yet nothing meaningful advances. They confuse motion with progress. Calm introduces perspective. It helps you see which tasks matter and which are merely loud. Over time, this perspective prevents burnout because effort is aligned with purpose rather than scattered across competing demands. Sacrifice is inevitable on long roads. You sacrifice comfort, immediate pleasure, and sometimes social approval. Calm makes these sacrifices tolerable by anchoring them to a clear reason. Without calm, sacrifice feels unfair. People begin to keep score, comparing their effort to others' outcomes. Comparison fuels resentment, and resentment erodes discipline. Calm interrupts this cycle by keeping attention on what you can control rather than what you cannot. Relationships are also affected by long-term calm. People who remain emotionally steady through challenges build trust. Others feel safe investing in them because their reactions are predictable and measured. This trust creates support systems that make long journeys more sustainable. Emotional volatility, on the other hand, isolates people. Support erodes, and the road feels heavier than it needs to be. There is an internal benefit as well. Calm builds self-respect. When you keep commitments to yourself despite slow progress, you strengthen your identity as someone who follows through. That identity becomes a source of motivation independent of external results. You no longer rely on praise or immediate success to keep going. You rely on your own standards. Delayed gratification sits at the center of this process. Choosing calm often means delaying emotional rewards. You do the work without applause. You stay patient without reassurance. You trust the process without constant proof. This is difficult not because it is complex, but because it is quiet. The mind craves stimulation and validation. Calm denies it those comforts in service of something larger. Many people abandon long-term goals not because they lack ambition, but because they lack emotional regulation. Ambition without calm becomes restless. It jumps from one idea to another, searching for momentum rather than building it. Calm anchors ambition. It keeps you committed to a direction long enough for meaningful results to appear. The uncomfortable truth is that long-term success is often boring up close. It involves repetition, uncertainty, and periods of doubt. Calm is what allows you to accept that boredom without interpreting it as failure. It helps you understand that progress is often invisible until it is undeniable. When calm becomes a habit, setbacks lose their power to derail you. They are processed as information rather than threats. Adjustments are made without self-judgment. The journey remains demanding, but it becomes manageable. Over time, the accumulation of calm choices creates momentum that emotional intensity never could. Long roads do not reward urgency, they reward endurance. Calm is the mechanism that turns endurance into an advantage. It keeps you aligned with your vision when distractions multiply and when results arrive slowly. It allows you to remain disciplined without becoming rigid and patient, without becoming passive. In a world that constantly pushes for immediate reactions, calm becomes the quiet discipline that keeps you moving forward when others burn out or change direction. Here's the truth most people avoid. A calm mind is a disciplined mind, and discipline is freedom. When you train yourself to stay calm, you stop giving your power away to people, situations, and temporary emotions. You start thinking in years instead of moments. You move with intention instead of impulse. Your future doesn't need you loud. It needs you focused. It doesn't need you reactive. It needs you consistent. And it doesn't need you emotional. It needs you disciplined. Stay calm, stay patient, stay committed to the long vision, because the person who can control their mind can control their direction and eventually their destiny.